Nietzsche, Selected Aphorisms, Part 3, From the Wanderer and His Shadow. Elements of revenge. The word revenge is spoken so quickly that it almost seems as if it could not contain more than one conceptual and emotional root. Hence we are still at pains to find this root. Our economists, in the same way, have never wearied of scenting a similar unity in the word value, and of hunting after the primitive root idea of value, as if all words were not pockets into which this or that or several things have been stuffed at once. So revenge is now one thing, now another, and sometimes more composites. Let us first distinguish that defensive counter-blow which we strike almost unconsciously, even at inanimate objects, such as machinery in motion, that have hurt us. The notion is to set a check to the object that has hurt us. The notion is to set a check to the object that has hurt us by bringing the machine to a stop. Sometimes the force of this counter-blow, in order to attain its object, will have to be strong enough to shatter the machine, if the machine be too strong to be disorganized by one man. The latter will all the same strike the most violent blow he can, as a sort of last attempt. We behave similarly towards persons who hurt us, at the immediate sensation of the hurt. If we like to call this an act of revenge, well and good, but we must remember that here self-preservation alone has set its... self-preservation alone has set its cogwheels of reason in motion, and that after we do not think of the doer of the injury, but only of ourselves. We act without any idea of doing injury in return, only with a view to getting away safe and sound. It needs time to pass in thought from oneself to one's adversary, and ask oneself at what point he is most vulnerable. This is done in the second variety of revenge, the preliminary idea of which is to consider the vulnerability and susceptibility of the other. The intention then is to give pain. On the other hand, the idea of securing himself against further injury is in this case so entirely outside the avenger's horizon that he almost regularly brings about his own further injury and often foresees it in cold blood. If in the first sort of revenge it was the fear of a second blow that made the counter-blow as strong as possible, in this case there is an almost complete indifference to what one's adversary will do. The strength of the counter-blow is only determined by what he has already done to us. Then what has he done? What profit is it to us if he is now suffering, after we have suffered through him? This is a case of readjustment, whereas the first act of revenge only serves the purpose of self-preservation. It may be that through our adversary we have lost property, rank, friends, children. These losses are not recovered by revenge. The readjustment only concerns a subsidiary loss which is added to all the other losses. The revenge of readjustment does not preserve one from further injury. It does not make good the injury already suffered, except in one case. If our honor has suffered through our adversary, revenge can restore it. But in any case, honor has suffered an injury if intentional harm has been done us, because our adversary proved thereby that he was not afraid of us. By revenge we prove that we are not afraid of him either, and herein lies the settlement, the readjustment. The intention of showing their complete lack of fear goes so far in some people that the dangers of revenge, loss of health or life or other losses, are in their eyes an indispensable condition of every vengeful act. Hence they practice the duel, although the law also offers them aid in obtaining satisfaction for what they have suffered. They are not satisfied with a safe means of recovering their honor, because this would not prove their fearlessness. In the first-named variety of revenge, it is just fear that strikes the counter-blow. In the second case, it is the absence of fear, which, as has been said, wishes to manifest itself in the counter-blow. Thus nothing appears more different than the motives of the two courses of action which are designated by the one word, quote, revenge, unquote. Yet it often happens that the avenger is not precisely certain as to what really prompted his deed. Perhaps he struck the counter-blow from fear and the instinct of self-preservation. But in the background, when he has time to reflect upon the standpoint of wounded honor, he imagines that he has avenged himself for the sake of his honor. This motive is in any case more reputable than the other. An essential point is whether he sees his honor injured in the eyes of others, the world, or only in the eyes of his offenders. In the latter case, he will prefer secret, in the former open revenge. Accordingly, as he enters strongly or feebly into the soul of the doer and the spectator, his revenge will be more bitter or more tame. If he is entirely lacking in this sort of imagination, he will not think at all of revenge, as the feeling of honor is not present in him, and accordingly cannot be wounded. In the same way, he will not think of revenge if he despises the offender and the spectator, because as objects of his contempt they cannot give him honor, and accordingly cannot rob him of honor. Finally, he will forego revenge in the not uncommon case of his loving the offender. It is true that he then suffers loss of honor in the other's eyes, and will perhaps become less worthy of having his love returned. But even to renounce all requital of love is a sacrifice that love is ready to make when its only object is to avoid hurting the beloved object. This would mean hurting oneself more than one is hurt by the sacrifice. Accordingly, everyone will avenge himself, unless he be bereft of honor or inspired by contempt or by love for the offender. Even if he turns to the law courts, he desires revenge as a private individual, but also as a thoughtful, prudent man of society. He desires the revenge of society upon one who does not respect it. Thus, by legal punishment, private honor as well as that of society is restored. That is to say, punishment is revenge. Punishment undoubtedly contains the first mentioned element of revenge, in as far as by its means society helps to preserve itself and strikes a counterblow in self-defense. Punishment desires to prevent further injury, to scare other offenders. In this way, the two elements of revenge, different as they are united in punishment. And this may perhaps tend most of all to maintain the above-mentioned confusion of ideas, thanks to which the individual avenger generally does not know what he really wants. 194. Dreams. Our dreams, if for once in a way they succeed and are complete, generally a dream is a bungled piece of work, are symbolic concatenations of scenes and images in place of a narrative poetical language. They paraphrase our experiences of expectations or relations with poetic boldness and definiteness, so that in the morning we are always astonished at ourselves when we remember the nature of our dream. In dreams we use up too much artistry, and hence are often too poor in artistry in the daytime. 203. Too much and too little. Men nowadays live too much and think too little. They have hunger and dyspepsia together, and become thinner and thinner however much they eat. He who now says, quote, "Nothing has happened to me," unquote, is a blockhead. 204. End and goal. Not every end is the goal. The end of a melody is not its goal, and yet if a melody has not reached its end, it has also not reached its goal. A parable. 208. How to have every man against you. If someone now dared to say, quote, "He that is not for me is against me," unquote, he would at once have all against him. This sentiment does credit to our era. 249. Positive and negative. This thinker needs no one to refute him. He is quite capable of doing that himself. 263. The path to equality. A few hours of mountain climbing make a blackguard and a saint two rather similar creatures. Weariness is the shortest path to equality and fraternity. And finally, liberty is bestowed by sleep. 292. The victory of democracy. All political powers nowadays attempt to exploit the fear of socialism for their own strengthening. Yet in the long run, democracy alone gains the advantage, for all parties are now compelled to flatter, quote, the masses, unquote, and grant them facilities and liberties of all kinds, with the result that the masses finally become omnipotent. The masses are as far as possible removed from socialism as a doctrine of altering the acquisition of property. If once they get the steering wheel into their hands through great majorities in their parliaments, they will attack with progressive taxation the whole dominant system of capitalists, merchants, and financiers, and will in fact slowly create a middle class which may forget socialism like a disease that has been overcome. The practical result of this increasing democratization will next be a European League of Nations, in which each individual nation, delimited by the proper geographical frontiers, has the position of a canton with its separate rights. Small account will be taken of the historic memories of previously existing nations, because the pious affection for these memories will be gradually uprooted under the democratic regime, with all its craze for novelty and experimentation. The corrections of frontiers that will prove necessary will be so carried out as to serve the interests of the great cantons, and at the same time that of the whole federation, but not that of any venerable memories. To find the standpoints for these corrections will be the task of future diplomats, who will have to be at the same time students of civilization. Agriculturists and commercial experts with no armies but motives and utilities at their back. Then only will foreign and home politics be inseparably connected, whereas today the latter follows its haughty dictator and gleans in sorry baskets the stubble that is left over from the harvest of the former. 297. Not to see too soon. As long as we undergo some experience, we must give ourselves up to the experience and shut our eyes. In other words, not become observers of what we are undergoing, for to observe would disturb good digestion of the experience, and instead of wisdom we should gain nothing but dyspepsia. 298. From the practice of the wise. To become wise, we must will to undergo certain experiences, and accordingly leap into their jaws. This, it is true, is very dangerous. Many a sage has been eaten up in the process. 301. A sign of love. Someone said, there are two persons about whom I have never thought deeply. That is a sign of my love for them. 302. How we seek to improve bad arguments. Many a man adds a bit of his personality to his bad arguments, as if they would thus go better and change into straight and good arguments. In the same way, players at skittles, even after a throw, try to give a direction to the ball by turns and gestures. 307.
when it is necessary to part. You must, for a time at least, part from that which you want to know and measure. Only when you have left a city do you see how high its towers rise above its houses. 3:17. Opinions and fish. We are possessors of our opinions as of fish, that is, in so far as we are possessors of a fish pond. We must go fishing and have luck. Then we have our fish, our opinions. I speak here of live opinions, of live fish. Others are content to possess a cabinet of fossils, and in their head, quote, convictions, unquote. 3:22. Death. Through the certain prospect of death, a precious fragrant drop of frivolity might be mixed with every life. And now, you singular druggist souls, you have made of death a drop of poison, unpleasant to taste, which makes the whole of life hideous. (3:23) Repentance. Never allow repentance free play, but say at once to yourself, quote, that would be adding a second piece of folly to the first, unquote. If you have worked evil, you must bethink yourself of doing good. If you are punished for your actions, submit to the punishment with the feeling that by this very submission you are somehow doing good, in that you are deterring others from falling into the same error. Every malefactor who is punished has a right to consider himself a benefactor to mankind. 3:26. Don't touch. There are dreadful people who, instead of solving a problem, complicate it for those who deal with it and make it harder to solve. Whoever does not know how to hit the nail on the head should be entreated not to hit the nail at all. 3:33. Dying for, quote, truth, unquote. We should not let ourselves be burnt for our opinions. We are not so certain of them as all that. But we might let ourselves be burnt for the right of possessing and changing our opinions. End of Nietzsche, selected Aphorisms, Part 3, The Wanderer and His Shadow.